"You're not smart enough for this job," my brother said, until I became his boss and assigned him to clean my office. The first time I stepped into the glass-paneled lobby of Halcyon Dynamics as a full-fledged executive, the scent of antiseptic polish and ambition almost made me laugh. Once, long ago, I had wandered these corridors as a temp assistant, skimming paper trays and fixing coffee orders for meetings I wasn't invited to. Back then, my presence was more of a shadow than a substance, silent, underfoot, and easily ignored. That version of me hadn't earned a second glance, especially not from the company's so-called golden boy, my brother, Adrian. Adrian, who'd always moved with the conviction of someone born to command boardrooms and dominate dinner conversations, had never looked at me with anything but patronizing tolerance. He had the resume of a prodigy and the arrogance to match. By the time he graduated summa cum laude with 2 majors and a minor, I was still fumbling through community college courses and experimenting with side gigs that rarely paid on time. His jokes at family gatherings were always sharp-edged, dipped in mock concern. "Still trying to find yourself, huh?" he'd say, sipping from a glass of vintage mocktail he made sure everyone knew he could afford. I learned early on that his praise came only in backhanded compliments and only when it served as a mirror to his superiority. When I announced, casually over dinner one night, that I'd applied to the same firm where he had already carved out a reputation, he nearly choked on his steak. He blinked, then snorted like I'd told him I planned to audition for NASA. "You," he chuckled, eyes flicking across the table with theatrical disbelief. "You're not smart enough for this job. It'll eat you alive." My parents laughed nervously. I did not. He hadn't known about the night classes I'd been taking, or the certifications I quietly racked up while juggling freelance consulting and digital project work. I buried myself in data analytics, UX strategy, and change management. While he was toasting promotions and posting selfies from leadership retreats, I was poring over business models and restructuring case studies until dawn. He believed in credentials. I believed in competence. That distinction, I'd soon discover, was everything. Then came the buyout. When the private equity firm acquired Halcyon Dynamics, the executive board didn't want the same tired corporate lineage. They wanted disruption, reinvention, innovation without ego. I wasn't just a convenient candidate, I was the candidate they were watching before they even finalized the merger. My presentation on departmental efficiency, which I delivered at a niche tech summit 6 months prior, had caught the right eyes. I didn't just get a new title. I was given control over the direction of the entire operations wing. The first day I arrived as the new director of strategic development, I wore black. Sharp, clean, and unfussy. I wanted contrast. I wanted to look like the very opposite of who they remembered. As the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, my heels made a muted, deliberate rhythm against the marble tiles. My name, recently etched onto the frosted glass door of the corner office, gleamed in sunlight. He didn't see me at first. He was huddled in a cubicle 2 wings over, part of the legacy team awaiting departmental reassignment. His hair was shorter now, his posture tighter, like ambition had curled in on itself. When our eyes finally met, his smirk faltered. Just a flicker, but enough to shatter the image he had of me. There was confusion, then disbelief, then the bitter, dawning comprehension that the company he thought he had conquered now belonged to me. I didn't need a confrontation. I didn't crave vengeance. What I desired was recognition. Not the kind handed out at award ceremonies, but the unspoken sort that comes in a room gone silent. The restructuring memo was brief, concise, and approved by every level of senior oversight. My signature was the final stamp. When Adrian opened it at his desk and read the words, "Assigned Office Maintenance, Executive Wing," I was told by the HR liaison that he stared at it for 10 full minutes before saying anything. There was no tantrum, no storming into my office, just a long, reluctant acceptance that pride, in the wrong hands, corrodes faster than steel. He showed up an hour later with a janitorial cart and a look that could have stripped paint. I was mid-call, discussing a regional expansion initiative, when he knocked and stood motionless in the doorway. I waved him in without pausing my conversation, gesturing vaguely toward the bins and floor panels. He moved with robotic stiffness, his face devoid of the smirk he'd once wielded like a weapon. As he emptied my trash and polished the surface of my desk, the silence between us throbbed like a wound too fresh to scab. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Every movement he made, Every crumpled memo he retrieved, every fingerprint he wiped from my glass desk was a ritual of penance he'd never anticipated performing. I let him work, uninterrupted, savoring the inversion of hierarchy without gloating. Because this wasn't about humiliation. This was about exposure. About the unmasking of a myth. That intelligence, raw and untamed, can thrive outside of traditional validation. That being underestimated isn't a weakness, but a camouflage. He had spent his life climbing ladders that others had placed for him, mistaking elevation for evolution. I had built my ascent brick by brick, quietly, far from applause. He lingered longer than necessary once the task was done, as though waiting for me to speak. I didn't. I returned to my work, tapping notes into a tablet, reviewing department metrics. Eventually, he turned and left, the cartwheels squeaking as they rolled over polished stone. There were no fireworks, no dramatic confrontations, just the echo of a changed reality settling into place. And from my chair, my office, my name on the glass, my rules, I finally understood something he never would. You don't need to be the genius in the room when you're the one who signs the checks and locks the door behind you. And outside that door, the echo of his steps faded into the rhythm of the workday. A week passed before he spoke a word to me. He came in every morning, precisely at 8, dressed in business slacks he still seemed to think would disguise the demotion. The uniform he was issued, company standard maintenance blue, was always folded neatly in his cart. I never asked why he refused to wear it. Pride, most likely. An anchor too heavy to discard, even when it drags a man to the bottom. I let him keep his charade. Stripping a man of illusion is far more cruel when done through time, not confrontation. Each morning, I'd find him already inside my office, clearing the glass of smudges that didn't exist, aligning the pens on my desk with a precision that bordered on obsessive. He didn't meet my eyes. I didn't offer small talk. We operated in a silent, unspoken rhythm. Him trying to prove he still had dignity left to salvage. Me reminding him he no longer had anything to command. Outside the executive wing, whispers had begun to ripple. People noticed the surname on his badge, the resemblance in our faces, the way he avoided everyone's gaze in the halls. They tried not to stare, but curiosity, like water, always finds its cracks. In meetings, I caught glimpses of it, those sidelong glances exchanged between longtime staffers, the occasional nervous cough whenever his name was mentioned. It wasn't scandal that interested them. It was the shift in balance, the tectonic rearrangement of assumed roles. My rise wasn't just unorthodox, it unsettled them. The creative misfit turned strategist, the invisible brother now steering the ship, the janitor who used to hold court in conference rooms. They tried to reframe the story in real time, to understand how someone they'd dismissed could now hold the authority to redirect their entire futures. That tension, tight as piano wire, hummed through every corridor I walked. But in truth, I wasn't interested in retribution. My focus remained on the work. The company had long suffered under a culture of inherited success, where promotion came by association rather than merit. Adrian's position had been a byproduct of that flaw, a testament to how confidence, when dressed in expensive suits and fluent jargon, could mask stagnation. I had no intention of dismantling the empire we inherited. I wanted to rebuild it into something sharper, leaner, meaner. By Thursday, Adrian began taking longer to clean my office. He'd linger by the bookshelves, subtly scanning the titles, occasionally pausing at the awards framed on my wall, most of which had been earned in rooms he'd never heard of. During nights, he'd assumed I spent drifting without purpose. I could see the questions collecting in his eyes, thick and unspeakable. He wanted to know when it had all changed. When the brother he used to mock had slipped past him, not just in position but in relevance. I never offered that story. Not because he didn't deserve it, but because I didn't owe it to him. One afternoon, while reviewing a quarterly report, I heard him speak, low, almost mechanical. "You redesigned the productivity model," he said, not turning from the window he'd just finished polishing. "The one from the legacy systems. You eliminated all redundant workflows." I looked up, surprised not at the observation, but at the fact that he noticed. "That's right," I replied without inflection. Efficiency had to come first. He gave a small nod, more to himself than to me. Then he returned to dusting, as if the admission had simply slipped out against his will. That moment, brief, muted, yet oddly profound, wasn't reconciliation, but it was the first crack in the shell he had wrapped himself in. The truth was, Adrian had always functioned within structure. Given instructions, he performed brilliantly. Offered a rubric, he excelled. But take away the safety rails, the predictable ladder, and he floundered. He wasn't trained to create his own vision. He was taught to execute someone else's. That was the flaw he never recognized in himself. He thought being intelligent meant being right. But the world rewards those who can adapt, not those who recite. I began to watch him more closely, not as a brother, but as an organism in unfamiliar terrain. There was a tightness to his jaw now, a reserved politeness to his movements, as though he were recalibrating in real time. He started cleaning more than just the surfaces. He organized the cords behind my monitors, replaced the air filters, even dusted the recessed lighting without being asked. This wasn't about cleaning anymore. It was about presence, about relevance. He was grasping for something to hold on to, even if it was as intangible as acknowledgement. The executive team noticed, of course. One afternoon during a closed-door session, my lead analyst, Lorna, leaned in and said, "He's acting like someone waiting for a second chance." I didn't respond, because I wasn't sure if it was pity I felt or something colder. That night I stayed late in the office. The city outside burned in amber, windows glowing like the embers of forgotten dreams. I stood by the glass, staring at the skyline I once believed I'd never rise above. Behind me, the door creaked. Adrian stepped inside quieter than usual. "You're still here," he said, not quite a question. "I usually am," I answered, watching his reflection in the window. He stood awkwardly, holding the mop like it weighed more than it should. "I didn't see it," he murmured, after a long pause. "Any of this. I didn't know." "You didn't want to," I replied evenly. "Knowing would have meant accepting you were wrong." He exhaled, a sound that carried the weight of years. "I was always told I'd lead. It never occurred to me that someone else might be better suited." His honesty wasn't apology. It was resignation. That subtle acknowledgement hit harder than any remorse could have. I turned, finally facing him. Leadership isn't about who was promised the role. It's about who earned it when no one was watching. He didn't speak again. He only nodded, then turned and walked out, the door closing gently behind him. I stood there for a long while, watching his silhouette disappear down the hall. There was no vindication in the quiet, no triumph in the title, just a hollow understanding of what legacy truly costs when it's built on someone else's assumption of your worth. And tomorrow, when the office lights clicked on and the staff filed in, he would return again. Same cart, same silence. But he was starting to see the truth behind the glass, and that was enough. For now. 2 months. That's how long it took for the whispers to die, for the stares to stop, and for the office to adjust to the new world order where Adrian, once untouchable, reported to a man he never considered competition. The transformation wasn't loud. It was gradual, like rust creeping over steel. Every day he arrived without fail, pressed uniform tucked over a frame that had once carried entitlement like armor. Gone were the tailored suits, the curated arrogance, the cocky rhythm in his walk. What remained was a man stripped of perception, moving through hallways that no longer bent around his presence. I observed him from behind the mirrored surface of my office walls, often without saying a word. He completed his duties with a strange, almost ritualistic thoroughness. It was no longer about cleaning. It was penance wrapped in routine, a silent reclamation of purpose through service. His hands, once used to swipe across touch-screen projectors and gesture grand ideas into existence, now gripped disinfectant bottles and swept floors until they glistened like new. My team, at first tentative around him, eventually forgot to care. Efficiency bred indifference, and when systems ran smoothly, no one asked questions. I never instructed them to ignore him. They simply followed the culture we'd rebuilt, one where value was earned, not presumed. Then, on a quiet Tuesday, something shifted. I'd just finished a performance audit when a knock tapped against my door, softer than usual. Adrian stepped inside, holding a sealed envelope in one hand. His face held none of the defensiveness I'd seen in our youth, none of the biting sarcasm or passive contempt, just clarity, calm, a silence that came not from shame, but from peace. "I'm leaving," he said simply, placing the envelope on my desk. I looked at it but didn't open it. Where to? There's a nonprofit initiative in Jakarta, Sustainable Urban Planning. They need someone who understands infrastructure but is willing to start small. Humble work, ground-up development, real impact of all the paths I imagined for him. That wasn't one I expected. I leaned back slightly, watching the weight of ego fall away from him like old skin. He wasn't trying to impress me anymore. There was no pitch behind his words, just a man who had finally understood what the mirror never showed him. "And this is what you want?" I asked. Not because I needed confirmation, but because I wanted to hear the conviction. "For once," he said with a small, sad smile. "Yes. No title, no prestige, just something that makes me useful again." I nodded once. "Then go." "You've earned the right to begin again." He hesitated before turning. "I thought I'd hate you for what happened," he said quietly. "But watching you, how you lead, how you work, I realized something. You didn't take this from me. I gave it away a long time ago." That struck deeper than anything he'd said since the day I walked into the office as his superior. For a moment the air between us felt still, not with tension, but with an understanding that had been too long in the making. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. He left the room without ceremony. No dramatic exit, no lingering glances, just the sound of the door clicking shut behind him. Later that evening, I opened the envelope. Inside was a single handwritten note and a photo. Us, as kids, standing by the backyard treehouse he built and I painted. In the photo, his arms are crossed proudly and I'm holding a brush, streaks of color splashed across my face. At the bottom of the note, in careful, unhurried script, he wrote, "You always saw the whole picture. I just built the frame." The next morning, his cart was gone from the executive wing. His badge was deactivated. The directory no longer carried his name. I didn't announce it. I didn't need to. The company moved on, but something in me shifted, like a door quietly closed behind a room I'd long outgrown. Weeks passed. Seasons began to turn. Promotions came. Projects launched. The office evolved, humming with innovation and forward motion. But I kept that photo in the drawer of my desk, not as a token of victory, but as a reminder that growth rarely comes from applause. It's born in silence, shaped by the long grind through invisibility and the unwavering discipline to prove something, first to yourself and only later to the world. One afternoon, during a team luncheon, Lorna leaned over her plate and asked, "Do you ever miss what it used to be like, before all this?" I took a sip of water, glanced around the room, at the faces that now looked to me with trust instead of skepticism, at the floor once polished by someone who had to lose everything to understand what mattered, and said, "No, I don't miss what I had to survive to get here." She nodded, understanding the subtext. Later that night I stood by my office window. The city lights sprawled beneath me like constellations scattered across concrete. I thought of Adrian, somewhere across the globe, building again, this time not for applause but for something purer. And I knew, finally, that the chapter had closed. Not in triumph, not in revenge, but in truth. Because in the end, it wasn't about proving I was smarter. It was about showing I was never less.